But the fact is that this area of southern Indiana, where I have lived now since 1979, and is an area that has become so very special to me, and in fact is an area that I consider myself integral to, and it is integral to my entire being. There is no separation between me and this forest. And so I end up being the forest defending itself.
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this episode, we have Andy Mahler. Andy Mahler first became involved in forest protection efforts in 1985 after encountering Forest Service clear cuts in the Hoosier National Forest near his southern Indiana home. As president of Protect Our Woods, a local grassroots forest protection organization he helped found, he led efforts to protect the Hoosier from off-road vehicle trails, timber sales, and oil and gas leasing. In 1991, he co-founded Heartwood and served as Heartwood coordinator. During that time, Heartwood used legal challenges to stop all logging on national forests in 6 Midwestern states. He continues to volunteer with Heartwood and has helped organize all 20 Heartwood Forest Councils. There's a lot more to Andy than that, but that'll have to do for now. Thanks for being on the Green Root Podcast.
My pleasure, Josh. And I need to amend that intro a little because there have now been, this is going to be, I think, the 33rd Heartwood Forest Council. So there have been several that I have not helped to organize. So that tells you that was a 15-year-old bio I sent you, and I apologize. There have been a few changes in the last 15 years, but everything you said otherwise is completely accurate.
That makes perfect sense. Yes, thanks for the update there. So we want to front load this episode where you're going to talk a little bit about this recent milestone that you experienced in terms of forest protection in your area of, frankly, national significance. So let's start with that. What just happened?
Well, even since what just happened, other stuff has happened. But the one that we're referring to here is that Mike Braun, the newly elected Republican governor of the state of Indiana, who was endorsed by Donald Trump, wrote a letter to the chief of the Forest Service, who has since retired, Randy Moore. But this is a Republican governor contacting the chief of the Forest Service and asking him to withdraw a timbering, burning, herbicide spraying, and road building project in southern Indiana's Orange County in the Hoosier National Forest, an area that the Forest Service gave the name Buffalo Springs to, a 30,000 acre area. So Governor Mike Braun has come down in support of the request by the citizens of the area and the citizens of the state, and frankly, citizens from all around the region and across the country, that this area be protected, this area that they call Buffalo Springs. And now we call it Buffalo Springs, and we're grateful to have such a powerful and iconic name around which to organize. And we will obviously talk more about that shortly.
That's frankly incredible. The fact that you got an elected official to come out so strongly on this is astounding on its own. But the fact that it's a Republican that's almost unheard of.
Well, Josh, and it goes even beyond that. This is one of his first official acts as governor. He has barely even taken office, and one of the first things he does is goes to bat for the citizens of this state to protect the limited public land base from the tender mercies of the federal agency that is supposed to be protecting this land, but as you know and your listeners know, have often been the instigators and the beneficiaries of the extensive exploitation of these public lands. Right. So, I mean, the timing is quite remarkable too, because of course now there's this entire attempt on the part of the new administration in Washington to absolutely gut the federal bureaucracy at all levels, except for those ones that allow them to continue to exert increased power and amass greater personal wealth. But anything that serves the public, they are absolutely determined to cut it off at the knees. Now, there have been beneficiaries in this process because some of the people whose work they are cutting off at the knees includes the timber sale planters and the deliberate incendiarists of the national forest here in the eastern states. And obviously, there's similar issues on western states and all around the country. But we are not sad to see the Forest Service budget cut. We've been calling for the Forest Service budget to be cut for a long time. Now, whether they're going to cut the parts that need to be cut remains to be seen. And Josh, I know that's a conversation you yourself have initiated. So we'll probably go there during the course of this conversation as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, lots of great info there. I guess what I'd be most interested in doing, and I'm sure our listeners would be, is to go into some of the background of the project, the campaign, almost backwards engineer how you got to this point, because I think this is of such significance that people need to learn from this. So, I guess we don't need to go into all the details, but tell us a little bit about what this project has been, its proposal, what it's supposed to do, impacts, etc.
And this is a multi-dimensional puzzle here that we're constructing and deconstructing. But the fact is that this area of southern Indiana, where I have lived now since 1979, and is an area that has become so very special to me, and in fact is an area that I consider myself integral to, and it is integral to my entire being. There is no separation between me and this forest. And so I end up being the forest defending itself. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a bridge too far for some people, but the reality is I've been working to protect this area of southern Indiana since 1985, as you mentioned in the intro. The Forest Service proposed off-road vehicle trails in an area called Little Africa. Had been a settlement of free blacks. This area, Orange County, Indiana, was named after Orange County, North Carolina, where a bunch of Quakers migrated to this area where I live now because they abhorred the institution of slavery. So these Quakers brought freed Africans with them to southern Indiana to establish this colony in the wilderness. So there's a lot of history here. And another piece of the history, of course, is that part of the reason there's a town here, this little town of Paoli, is because it happens to intersect the place where the buffalo trace, the major travel way for migrating wildlife, for indigenous people and for early settlers to the region, that primary travel way, the buffalo trace, the one place it still can be found, that's my dog bumping his butt around, changing the camera angle. The one place it can still be seen in the public ownership in southern Indiana is here in Orange County. The Buffalo Trace crosses the Hoosier National Forest only a couple of miles from where I sit here. And then only a half mile, one of our property lines, our eastern property line, if you follow our eastern property line, a mile south of where I sit, you will find the initial survey marker from which the entire western United States was surveyed, but certainly the original Northwest Territory, which was Indiana, what's now Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. There may have been more to it than that, but certainly those four states were part of the original Northwest Territory. Well, that's significant because, and this is significant to people in the West in particular, I think, because in the West, surveying is on the Jeffersonian range, township, and section. You fly over it in an airplane, you see these perfectly square blots where industrial lands have been absolutely obliterated, and then you see the square of green, it's the old railroad lands. Well, all that surveying began 1 mile south of here because everything east of here was surveyed by the original surveying technique called meets and bounds, where they would just stretch chains and then describe natural features. But everything that got surveyed from here west, the natural features got subsumed by the surveying so that the landscape was dramatically changed to reflect the map rather than the map being drawn to accurately reflect the landscape. That's an important psychological distinction that started right here in southern Indiana. So once again, it's very significant that that line, that northwest principal meridian, where that northwest principal meridian crossed the Buffalo Trace, that's where we sit. And that's the area that we call Buffalo Springs, or the Forest Service did. Now, for the listeners, there is no such place in southern Indiana as Buffalo Springs, not one specific place. So that gives us a great advantage, and this is how we hope to play this to the advantage of forest activists and public lands and water quality activists and climate activists all across the country. Because Buffalo springs refers to a general idea that represents a concept. To the extent that general idea and that concept exist and are worth defending elsewhere, and those ideas and concepts being the place you live, the place you love, the place that you consider to be home, the quality of the water, the surrounding landscape, especially the wild landscape, especially the wild landscape in public ownership, particularly wild forests in public ownership, produce the cleanest water available to the mass of citizens residing in the North American continent. Obviously, if you're somewhere where a glacier is melting, that's pretty good water too. But if you're in an area like Indiana with 7 million people on 23 million acres, there's no place you can bend down and drink water right out of the ground except right here. I could take you, we could pick up this phone and go for a short walk. And I could take you to a spring where we could dip a little cup right under that little trickle of water, put it to our lips, and be some of the sweetest water you ever tasted. That's the springs. So you got the buffalo from the Buffalo Trace, and you got springs. The Forest Service was looking at the map. There's a lake over here called the Springs Valley Recreation Area. So Buffalo Trace, Springs Valley Recreation Area will mash those two names together, call this area Buffalo Springs. Now, springs are very significant to the development of Orange County because not only is this the place where the Buffalo Trace intersected the north-south meridian that led to the surveying of the entire North American continent from here west, this area also has, in addition to these precious, delicious freshwater springs, a variety of mineral springs, include lithium springs and sulfur springs. And that's why the bison stopped here on their migration from the bluegrass of Kentucky over to the prairies of Illinois. We were halfway between their trek from the falls of the Ohio, what's now Louisville and New Albany, over to the Vincennes at the border of the Wabash River with what became the state of Illinois. Halfway between those two rivers were these mineral springs, and the bison would stop there for days to wallow in this mineral mud and to drink from the mineral waters. The native people drank from those mineral waters, seeing what it did for the deer and the bison and the beavers and the other creatures that would gather there to consume those special waters. And then the European Americans, the settlers, the pioneers, they all found those waters too. And as a result, a very significant tourism and recreation industry started in this county back in the 1800s already because people would come to take the waters. And now, in the contemporary setting, there are two extraordinary luxury hotels not 20 miles from where we sit here based on the quality of the water. Now, obviously, there's gambling and golf and all sorts of other amenities, but what established this as a tourism destination, a recreation destination, even more important, a health destination, was the water. So, anyway, that brings us more up into the present day. The past is we shut down the proposal to build the off-road vehicle trails back in 1985. We got the Hoosier declared the first national forest in the country officially closed to off-road vehicle trails. And then we discovered there was a thing called the forest plan, which is an abomination. In 1985 was the first forest plan in Region 9, which is the eastern United States, called for virtually the entire forest to be clear cut on either an 80-year or 120-year rotation. It called for up to 5 miles of road for every square mile of forest to service all that logging. And it called for the entire forest to be open to oil and gas leasing and other horrors, including, like I say, the motorcycle and off-road vehicle trails. And we got that defeated too. We got that absolutely thrown out, in part because we found notes in their files where they had fabricated the demand for roaded recreation in order to be able to attribute the cost of building the logging roads to the recreation budget so that the timber sales wouldn't show up as being quite so horrifically below cost. Well, needless to say, when we were able to point out to the people of the state of Indiana that the logging that was happening in National Forest at that time was costing billions of dollars of tax dollars every year, the Forest Service didn't stop logging, although they stopped logging for timber. Then it was logging for salvage and sanitation and ecosystem restoration and all that. But effectively, we shut down the logging in the Hoosier National Forest back in 1991. It took a few years for contracts that had been signed to be executed. But basically, for 30 years, we've had peace in the forest. Certainly here in Orange County, there's not been a logging operation proposed in 30 years. So after Protect Our Woods shut down log, and it wasn't just Protect Our Woods, don't get me wrong. Some of your viewers and listeners will know Jeff St. Clair of Counterpunch. Jeff was one of our closest colleagues and allies. He and others had organized an organization called Forest Watch up in Brown County, a couple counties north of here. Sierra Club was very active, Audubon Society. So there were lots of groups involved. But what swung the balance then and now is Orange County. And why is that? Because those Quakers that came up from North Carolina, well, they became Republicans during the Civil War because they abhorred slavery. So this area has been strongly Republican since its founding. Back when Republican meant you were anti-slavery and pro-rights of man, that sort of idea. So this has been a solidly Republican county forever. Now, occasionally Democrats get elected, but that's what gave this whole thing back in the 80s a significant twist, because everybody expected the college students from Bloomington and the suburbanites from Indianapolis to want to protect their favorite hiking spots. But when an area known more for soybeans and logging operations came out strongly against the logging in the Hoosier National Forest back in the 80s, people sat up and paid attention. We also had two members of Congress at that time, both Democrats, who went to bat for us. One of them, a guy named Jim Johnson. People in the Pacific Northwest will remember Jim Johnson, because Jim Johnson loved our forests of Indiana, but he loved the forests of the Pacific Northwest even more. And so he went to bat for those forests. Unfortunately, he kind of forgot about our forests, but nonetheless, here's this congressman from Indiana who is badgering the chief of the Forest Service about their below-cost timber sale program. And he's thinking, why am I hearing from a guy in Indiana? Do we even have forests in Indiana? We're busy logging out the last of the old growth in the Pacific Northwest. We don't want to be pestered by this guy from Indiana. Where is Indiana anyway? Is it between Alabama and Mississippi? Anyway, I digress. Because of our success in Protect Our Woods and protecting the Hoosier National Forest, we have the luxury of time to be able to, some people return to the lives they had led before they became involved in the activist community. But some of us decided, no, there are things that still need to be done. Because first we stopped the off-road vehicles, then we stopped the logging in the forest plan. But we looked around to our neighboring states in Ohio and Illinois and Kentucky, and we see that the logging in those states, if anything, is getting more intense. So that's where Heartwood came from. It's this notion that we are about protecting the forest wherever the forest grows, irrespective of the political and administrative boundaries drawn onto the map by the current occupants of Washington or Indianapolis or Springfield or Frankfurt. We're about the forest. And when you're about the forest, about the bioregional basis on which to organize, then you realize that a river like the Ohio River, the Ohio River right now is the border between Indiana and Kentucky, between Ohio and Kentucky, between Illinois and Kentucky. But in our view, no, the river isn't the border. The river is the center. The river is the heart of our community. So we are tied together by the landscape, by the contours of the landscape, by the forest that grows on the landscape, and by the waters that come from that landscape and the water. This brings us back to the present conversation. Josh, I apologize. I haven't even given you a chance to ask a second question. But anyway, the waters of this area come from the protected forest. The best water in the eastern United States comes from protected forests. So the Forest Service gives us this name, Buffalo Springs, the buffalo, actually the bison, but conventionally referred to as a buffalo. And for purposes of this conversation, we'll refer to it as the buffalo, but it is in fact the North American bison. Bison is the iconic North American mammal. It represents the wildness of the North American continent. And the water, the spring represents renewal, rebirth, purity, innocence, all those things. To have those two words wedded together to refer to that which we are trying to protect was a great gift to us, because while the area is certainly Buffalo Springs, because this is the area that the buffalo frequented, the bison frequented these mineral springs. There's no question about the land still shows the marks of their presence, even after they are no longer immediately with us, but they are yearning to return as we are yearning for their return. So that's another reason we protect the forest, because if we protect the forest, we protect the water. And if we protect the water, the buffalo will return.
Excellent. That's a great summary and history up to the present day. So tell us what this Buffalo project, the Buffalo Springs project, whatever euphemisms they're using, whatever name they're using, it's a logging project. Tell us about
Absolutely.
it.
It's the largest project in the history of the Hoosier National Forest. It's based on a forest plan that was written in 2006. Even though the National Forest Management Act says every forest should have a new plan no later than every 15 years. Now we can go more along those legal parameters if you'd be interested in exploring that, because we have actually already filed a couple lawsuits. But they proposed out of this 30,000 acre area. Now, a lot of your viewers and listeners will be from the Western states, and they may not be familiar with the origin of the forest in the east and the forest in the east. The forests in the east were established through the Weeks Act, and that means that most of the land, or virtually all the land here in the east has all been in private ownership before, so it's been reacquired by the federal government for inclusion in these national forests. And I won't go into the great depth in that history, but just I'll point out that the Hoosier National Forest was only formally dedicated as a national forest in 1951, though they began purchasing and acquiring land for 35, I believe it was. Still, they had enough land in the purchase area to consider a significant land base to call it a national forest. So in 1951, the Hoosier National Forest came into being. I consider that year significant because that's also the year I was born. So I know that uh, a forest that was born in 1951 is a very young forest. Now, obviously, many of the trees that were in that land were significantly older than that. But even so, this is a very young forest. Now, it's a root forest, and it's on the verge of taking on a lot of old growth characteristics. And that's exactly what the Forest Service doesn't want, because they know the public is very attached to big old trees. So they want to keep this as what you might call a, where there will be no acre of the national forest other than those that are formally designated as non-logging areas. Everything will be subject to management, because whatever is there now is not what should be there, and whatever, it's just it's this shell game where they'll be designate this area future old growth, and it just happens to be an area they just cleared. And this area over here that's old growth, well, that should be in a young early successional habitat, so something like the prairie warbler will have someplace to hang out. Well, you would think that the prairie warbler might want to actually hang out in the prairie rather than in the middle of a forest, but if you cut the forest down, then you provide habitat for the prairie warbler. Well, I digress again. So this plan for Buffalo Springs, a 30,000 acre area, 18,000 acres of those 30,000 approximately owned. But the other 12,000 acres privately owned. Like I say, there's a mixed ownership land. You do not find large contiguous blocks of public land in the east the way you do so predictably in large western public forests. So it's a different kind of forest, but I also have to point out that there are species of trees. And some forests in the West, there'll be maybe a dozen. So we have 100 species of trees and remarkably verdant, lovely forest, even if its scale is somewhat diminished compared to the grandeur of the Western forest. It has its own charms and wonders, and obviously water is the thing that ties Western forest to Eastern forest. We all love these sources, reliable sources of the best quality water available in North America. So anyway, we wanted to do 5,000 acres of logging, over 5,000 acres of logging. So the name of the project is the Buffalo Springs Restoration Project. And of course, the use of the term restoration is designed to confuse the public, because what's being restored is the condition of neglect and abuse that the land had been at the time it was acquired for inclusion in the national forest. And the other thing that's being restored is the Forest Service's timber budget, because when they cut trees in the name of restoration, they're allowed to keep that money to prepare additional timber sales and for some other uses. Anyway, so they were proposing 5,000 acres of restoration logging, including over 1,300 acres of restoration clear cutting. They're proposing to convert 10 miles of this horse hiking and biking trail that runs past our home here, convert 10 miles of that into a logging road. I'm sorry, 12 miles of that into a logging road to be closed to the public for up to 10 years while the log trucks hauled off the forest that I've been my entire adult life to protect. And they proposed spraying over 800 acres with herbicide in the cleanest municipal water supply in the entire state of Indiana. So this was back in we first heard about it in January of 21. And then by October of 21, they came out with their proposal, and they thought that they were going to start logging in April 2022. And here it is, March of 2025. So we've held them at bay for a good long while. And we've had just a remarkable success in mobilizing public sentiment. We've got the Orange County commissioners, 3 Trump supporting Republicans, unanimously opposed to the project. We've got the commissioners of Crawford County, the next county south, a sliver of the projects in that county. 3 Republican commissioners there unanimously opposed to it. We've got the Orange County Economic Development Partnership opposed to it. We've got the Crawford County Economic Development Corporation opposed to it. We've got the Paoli Chamber of Commerce opposed to it. We've got Orange County Farm Bureau opposed to it. And now I've got to mention, back in '85, when we first organized Protect Our Woods, uh, virtually every one of those entities was reliably opposed to our efforts to protect the forest. And in 30 years, it's Josh, I just cannot tell you how gratifying it is for people to come around. And these are mostly Republicans, mine, telling you, Andy, you were right. Thank you so much. We really appreciate what you did. So now, I go talk to the county commissioners and they thank me. I mean, it is mind boggling anyway. But so back to our story. When we had the Orange County commissioners writing to Governor Mike Braun saying, we support Protect Our Woods and we support what they're trying to accomplish, the next day, Mike Braun sends that letter to the chief of the Forest Service. So that's not a coincidence. Now, he was planning on sending something anyway. But the fact that the commissioners of Orange County, representing the voters of Orange County in a county that Donald Trump carried by 70%, that Orange County, Indiana, is letting him know that they don't want this. Now, Mike Braun is a little bit of an unusual animal for a Republican, because when he was a senator, as recently as a couple months ago, he was the first Republican senator to acknowledge that climate change was real and to establish a Republican senatorial climate caucus, and attracted 5 or 6 other Republican senators to it. So he knows that the climate crisis is real. And he also has quite a bit of personal interest in the issue, because he owns something like 20,000 acres of hardwood forest land in southern Indiana. So he's definitely knows where the money is. And the money is in recreation and tourism for the public lands, and public lands kept off the marketplace increase the value of the private holdings, including his extensive private holdings. So I'm not saying he's motivated entirely by altruistic considerations. He does happen to love forests, but he also happens to make a lot of money, and he does the two things together because he cuts his own timberland. And that's the capitalist system that we live under, for better or worse. So our best bet right now is to find people. Well, we don't have to find people. We just need to articulate, give people a chance to be heard, because I guarantee you that what we find here in Orange County is not unique to Orange County. And that is that 70% of the people in this country do not want their public forest cut down, Republican, Democrat, or Independent. So let's come back around to Buffalo Springs. The Forest Service has been through all their NEPA stuff, and they are this close to just signing off on the thing and being able to just start putting out contracts for logging bids. hopefully this letter from our governor will be a stumbling block, and maybe the Trump Musk thing will set them back as well. But they have not withdrawn this project yet. But we're not waiting. We do have a lawsuit in the wings. We've already got extremely competent legal assistance. People listening to this may be familiar with Eubanks and Associates. They're lined up. They've got this Buffalo Springs project in their sights. But I've never believed that you live or die by litigation. Litigation is one of our most important tools. But litigation, the most valuable aspect of litigation, in my personal experience and my personal opinion, is to raise public awareness about the issues, because the only thing that gets the goods in the long run is organized and mobilized public sentiment, uprising. And that's what we got here in Orange County. So you never want to let a good uprising go to waste just because you happen to get a victory. That was the lesson of protector woods that led to the formation of Heartwood. And the formation of Heartwood led to stopping of logging in the public forest all the way from Pennsylvania to Missouri. We shut them down. Now, unfortunately, none of that was permanent, but it lets people know that they have much more power in these situations than they might otherwise realize. I can't tell you how many times people have told me, Andy, it's the government. You can't possibly prevail. The Forest Service has 35,000 employees and a budget of $9 billion. You've got what, maybe 5 people at a meeting, and maybe you can count on 25 people to show up if you really get on the phone. And obviously, we've got a lot more than that, because we turned out 300 people for this one meeting with for the former Undersecretary of Agriculture, Dr. Homer Wilkes, who promised us a forest plan not once but twice in the presence of now Governor Braun. So that certainly worked to our advantage. But once again, I digress. We are going to move forward with our efforts to protect Buffalo Springs. And that gets us to the really important part of this conversation. That's a little thing that we've got brewing called Buffalo Spring. Now, some of your listeners will be familiar with Redwood Summer. A lot of your listeners, of course, will be familiar with Mississippi Summer. That was an organizing effort by Northern clerics and university students and regular people to go south and help mobilize voter registration in the southern states back in the civil rights era. Well, Judy Berry and colleagues back in the Redwood, in the Charles Hurwitz Redwood days, she organized something called Redwood Summer, which was a series of actions and teaching opportunities to help the loggers and the environmentalists recognize that they were actually part of the same team working to defend a sustainable form of life on the California coastal counties back when Charles Hurwitz and Maxon were proposing to liquidate what remained of the redwoods in private ownership. Anyway, that's a whole other story, and an amazing story, and I hope most of your folks are familiar with that story. But I just mentioned that because this is in Buffalo Spring, and this is all elaborate wordplay. But I love words, and that's why I'm so offended by the use of the term restoration. But anyway, so Buffalo Spring, the next 3 months, we're going to mobilize a campaign to generate public engagement on the issue of the protection of public lands in Indiana, a state not known for environmental activism, a state with the 49th worst water quality in the entire country, excepting the area around here, mind you. So people are familiar with water issues in Indiana because they don't have water. They don't have good drinking water. So we're going to try an experiment in daily democracy here in Indiana with the help of a guy named Jim Brightel, who spent most of his adult life trying to understand how citizens organize themselves into movements and campaigns to protect, will change public policy, but specifically Jim's interested in social justice and in public lands. He lived in Oregon for many years, and now he's back in New York State. But Jim has this model he wants to try, and we might just be that right setting for him to put it into place, where we're going to try and mobilize an unprecedented degree of public opposition or public support for protection. Let me put it in that term, because I think we always want to articulate what we're for as a means of stopping what we're against, but we don't want to be defined by what we're against. We're defined by what we're for, And then we mobilize people who share those values to protect that from the threats that are, anything that is beautiful and precious and wild anywhere on planet Earth is under threat right now. I think we all know that. So it's all about connecting with other people who share your love for a specific place, share your love for justice, share your love for a sense of community. We're all reaching out now. This is a dark and scary time, but guess what? It's also a time of unprecedented opportunity for organized, mobilized citizens to exercise true power, because there's so much chaos in the established and recognized power centers that there are extraordinary opportunities right now for new forms of communication, new forms of collaboration. I know that's a bad word. New forms of coordination, let me say, and cooperation among broad segments of the public to exercise unprecedented political power, I believe. And we're going to try and do that for forest protection here in Indiana over the next 3 months, up until about the summer solstice or the 1st of July, thereabouts. And based on what happens with our Buffalo Spring, we're simultaneously beginning a campaign, which is the Buffalo Spring Field Campaign. The importance of public forests as a source of reliable source of clean drinking water for human communities. That is going to be the focus of this Buffalo Spring Field Campaign. Now, the Buffalo Spring Field Campaign also happens to have the advantage of having the name Buffalo Springfield right in the middle of it. And Buffalo Springfield, I'm 74. Buffalo Springfield's one musical uh, conjugations uh, of the early 70s, known as the 60s, but most of what's referred to as the 60s actually took place in the early 70s. The band Buffalo Springfield produced two extraordinary talents, or showcased two extraordinary talents, more than two, but two that are well known: Neil Young and Stephen Stills. And they had a song called "For What It's Worth," and I'm listening are familiar with that tune. Anyway, so our campaign is called the Buffalo Springfield Campaign, or the Buffalo Spring Field Campaign. And we're going to say "for what it's worth," because guess what? We know what it's worth. We know what these worth. We know what these public land worth. And what we're really hoping is that this will get the attention of Neil Young and Stephen Stills, and they'll sue us, and we'll get a whole bunch of publicity at it, and they'll end up being our friends and allies in our effort to ensure broad support and broad long-term enduring protection for these public lands. Now, how this plays into uh, the needs and interests of folks working to protect public lands in the West is, I think, if we can get this model of organizing to work in Indiana, it's already packaged in such a form, be easily exportable to any other group anywhere else in the country. So our commitment is to secure long-term comprehensive protection for Buffalo Springs. Now, obviously, we're talking about Buffalo Springs here in the southern half of Orange County in south central Indiana. But Buffalo Springs is not just this area in south central Indiana, because the migrating bison went from Kentucky to Illinois. The river that runs through here runs right past Illinois, Kentucky, and Ohio. We are talking about Buffalo Springs. We really hope that this Buffalo Spring Field Campaign will help people working to protect the herds of wild bison in Yellowstone. We hope it will work to help people in New York State to protect lands up near the city of Buffalo. We hope it will help the people in eastern Kentucky to protect the the origin of the buffalo trace down in the bluegrass, where the principal driver of the logging of the hardwood forest is for the white oaks, and the principal use of the white oaks is to make barrels for bourbon.
So clearly, you've had a lot of successes in your work in this over the years. And this, I don't know if you want to frame it this way, but this has been a culmination of all the work you've been doing. You've had so many victories, but this, as you said before, is an important milestone. And this is not just about the local area. It is extremely important. We all have to care about our backyard. It ties into a region, it ties into nationally. So what would you say are the lessons that folks can take away no matter where they are, whatever ecosystem advocacy they might be doing in terms of this particular campaign?
My situation may be unique, but I know there are a lot of people that have a lot of the same sorts of components. And, when I was coming up as an activist, I would say there are two schools of thought in terms of activism, how to engage on issues. I'd say there's a campaigning model and an organizing model. And I'm not saying they're, mutually exclusive, but the campaigning model tended to be you identify a harm, you identify the agent of the harm, you bring, especially if this harm and this agent are representative of a larger pattern of harm. So, say it's a biomass incinerator, or say it's a wood products company that's using a lot of toxic materials and making a pressed wood or something like that. Or they're polluting the local water supply. You pick out a target, you make that target the focus to change their practices, their staples, or Citibank or something, with loaning to rainforest destroying corporations. You campaign with one target, you get that target to shift, then you move to the next target, get that to shift. When you've successfully got enough of your targets to shift policies, you move on to the next campaign. Well, for people who live in the area that they're trying to protect, there is no next campaign. Yes, there's a next threat, but the campaign is about the organizing. So it's not really a campaign because there's no end point. The idea of organizing is to use as a focus for the work you do your love for the specific place. A lot of people, the concept of justice. A lot of people, I hope it's almost a universal human sentiment, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be. But compassion, kindness, all these things are somewhat abstract, but relationship. It's all about relationship. So the fundamental relationship here that we're talking about is the fundamental relationship that creates a sense of a nation. And the fundamental relation that creates a nation is the relationship between people and the land. So, yes, there's an economic system, there's a political component, there's all these social and cultural components too. But what defines this nation ultimately, when you scrape away all the other stuff, is people who live someplace, they know they live there, and the organizing model is that you live someplace, you know where you live, and you get to know your neighbors. You work with your neighbors to understand what your shared interests in that area are, and you work together to ensure the collective benefit of those who live here now and those who will live here in the future. So that what we try to do is to pass on to those who will come after us as many of the joys, comforts, pleasures, and virtues as we've been able to enjoy. Not about winning, it's about building a stronger sense of the collective will of the people and the other species